Now, this is a wrap of Women's Month. We have saved the best for last. CNBC Africa's Nozipho Mbanjwa recently sat down and spoke to Phumzile Mlambo-Ngcuka and asked her about her role as United Nations Under Secretary for UN Women. Let's hear what she had to say.
It's more than half of the world's population that we are responsible for, but it's also one of the youngest agencies of the United Nations. So relatively small if you compare it with UNICEF or WHO. So on one end, I'm still building the institution. So I'm one of the executive directors and undersecretaries who are part of the foundation and the building blocks of UN Women. But also I'm responsible for ensuring that we've got programs that speak to the issues of women today, reaching out to partners within the United Nations system, being in sync with member states who feel very strongly that the work that we do in their countries must strengthen what they would like their societies and their women to achieve. But also I must also make sure that I manage the people that make the institution work. We've got 79 offices around the world. In countries where we don't have offices, we work in partnership or we are represented by other sister organizations or agencies of the United Nations. So I must make sure that those relationships work within the UN. We also are one of the UN agencies with a very strong relationship and need for civil society, because women are very passionate about addressing the women's issues. So I also reach out a lot to civil society. But also as a leader, you've got to take an organization a step further and to respond to the needs of the day. And one of my critical focus areas now is reaching out to men and boys, whose role and contribution in taking us to what I hope is going to be the expiry date of gender inequality is critical.
What are you doing differently to your predecessors who've held this post before?
Well, there's only been one person who had this job, and she actually was responsible for the nuts and bolts, making sure that all of the governance, all of the resolutions that needed to be taken by the UN are taken, making sure that we've got an organogram. So I'm really the first person now to see that we are developing depth in terms of our programs. And I'm sharpening our focus areas. Violence against women is a big issue for us. So I'm spending a lot of time reaching out to partners, ensuring that governments have got legislation around the world, that constitutions of member states are such that you could actually have follow-through legislation that makes sure that gender-based violence is a crime. It can be punished. So, and of course, leadership, supporting women's leadership all around the world. And women's economic empowerment.
You've outlined a couple of your priority areas, and I want to maybe go back to the one around the Constitution. Does the organization have the muscle to enforce some of the changes that you would deem are necessary to empower women?
Enforce is a strong word, but the fact that we, in most countries, probably the strongest thing and what we are known for is assisting governments to review all matters legal that have to do with women. And in many cases, we find that we are able to collaborate with parliaments, with heads of state, and as well as with specific ministers. So they do change legislation as a result of our collaborative efforts. Enforcement has been weak, implementation has been weak, and it is actually one of the areas that I am focusing on. I'm actually going to be redefining one of my deputies has got to focus just on that, because I have identified that as one of the areas where we have challenges. It's probably just as much a challenge for UN Women as it is, if you know, in our own country. We've got great legislation. Implementation can be a challenge. I would like with the experience that I've had in government, to use what I've learned in South Africa, where we've made breakthroughs in terms of implementation, what I'm learning in the United Nations from other countries, to really fine-tune how we track the passing of legislation, to making sure that it is adopted nationally, and that from there onwards it is actually being acted upon.
Well, that was Phumzile Mlambo-Ngcuka, United Nations Under Secretary General and Executive Director for UN Women.